Well, not so lucky here. They need the water. Firefighters in California trying to get the upper hand on a fast-moving wildfire raging in wine country. Hot, dry conditions fueling the fire, which started last Thursday and is now the largest to hit that part of the state this year. The blaze burned through nearly 7,000 acres so far and is only 13% contained. Officials declaring a state of emergency in Napa County over the weekend, forcing many residents to evacuate. To Central Oregon now, where massive wildfires have been tearing through the mountains. Thousands of people under evacuation orders as crews scramble to fight the flames. So far, 10 structures, including 4 homes, have been destroyed. A heat advisory is in place there through Wednesday, but there are chances of storms tomorrow that could make things more challenging for those crews fighting those fires.